The body without organs. Close your eyes. Not all the way, just enough to let the outlines blur. Let your breath slow. Let your limbs feel like mist. In this half-waking state, ask yourself, where does your body end? Where do you begin? And who told you that you are made the way you are supposed to be? There's a body you were given, mapped, named, divided, organs in their place, systems with borders, a head for thinking, a mouth for speech, a spine for standing. Every part specialized, arranged, ranked. You were told this is your structure, that this is what makes you you. But what if it isn't? Deleuze and Guattari whisper something strange and electric. The body without organs. A body not as machine, not as hierarchy, not as anatomy, but as field, as flow, as surface without grid lines. A terrain of sensations without fixed coordinates. A refusal to be organized. They are not talking about literal skin and bones, but about the map beneath the map, the inner image of yourself that has been constructed by desire, trauma, culture, language. You were taught to crave certain things, to fear others. You were taught which flows to permit and which to damn. You were taught where pleasure may go and where it must stop. To build a body without organs is not to destroy the body, but to unmake the structure of repression within it, to peel away the layers of social programming until only raw intensity remains. Desire not as lack, but as production. Not as need, but as force. You may feel this when you dance past exhaustion, when your body becomes rhythm, not form. You may feel it in dreams, when your hands meld into symbols and your spine becomes a tunnel. You may feel it during a fever, when everything disassembles, and you do not miss the parts. It is not comfortable, it is not safe, but it is real. More real than the instructions you were handed. You are not an office of organs. You are not a project to be optimized. You are not your habits, nor your posture, nor your compliance with the symbolic order. You are pulses, cravings, currents, silences. You are the hum before language, the twitch before thought. You are what resists coding, what slips out from under names. And yet, they will keep trying to program you. The family, the school, the state, the diagnosis, the advertisement. They will place signs over your nerves and say, this is your gender, this is your value, this is your limit. And you, believing in organs, will nod. But under the nod, the resistance grows. The body without organs is not a utopia. It is not a fantasy of perfect freedom. It is a field of experimentation. It is where you begin to deterritorialize yourself, to erase inherited borders, to become unrecognizable, not to others, but to the image they constructed for you. At night, in that strange borderland between waking and sleep, you may feel it. A sensation that is not tied to any part. A desire that doesn't point to an object, only to more desire. A body that moves without plan, without future, without name. This is not a dream. It is a diagram. It is an invitation, not to escape the world, but to remake your relation to it. Not to leave your body, but to touch it without the filter of expectation. You are not a system. You are not a product. You are a swarm, a frequency, a blur. And perhaps, if you listen closely, not with ears, but with the space beneath language, you will hear your real body, the one that does not answer, the one that does not ask. It just moves. The desert of the real. You look at the world and it looks back at you. But something's missing. You can't name it. Everything is where it should be. The lights, the sounds, the colors. And yet, there's a hollowness, a faint suspicion that you're watching a performance, and no one remembers the script. Welcome to the desert of the real. Jean Baudrillard warned us, the world we inhabit is no longer real in any meaningful sense. It has been replaced, not by illusion, but by simulation, by replicas, signs that no longer point to anything, images that do not represent, but replace. Once the map was smaller than the territory, a symbol, a sketch, an echo of something real. But now the map is all that remains. The territory has disappeared. The model has overtaken the original. You scroll endlessly, consuming images of joy, love, grief, purpose, filtered, curated, flattened. A constant flow of symbols disconnected from any grounding. You are shown not truth, but its simulation, a glow without heat. And the danger is not that we believe the lie. The danger is that there is no lie left to believe in. What we once called reality has been slowly replaced by a hyper-reality, a version of the world more real than real, cleaner than nature, sharper than emotion, more predictable than chaos. In hyper-reality, nothing is raw. Everything is aesthetic. And anything that resists simplification is pushed to the margins. You see it in the perfectly lit faces on your screen, in the stories that end too neatly, in the way tragedy is framed for sympathy, then swiped away for entertainment. You are fed an endless stream of meaning, and yet starve for something authentic. The simulacrum is not a fake. It is a thing that refers only to itself, a loop, an echo, a sign that no longer needs a source, a smile not connected to any joy, a memory manufactured for effect. Sometimes, late at night, you sense it, the quiet nausea of having consumed too much unreality, the weightless fatigue of a life lived through proxies. You begin to ask, what have I actually touched today? What have I seen that wasn't already processed for me? You reach for something, anything, that resists the polish, the crack in the wall, the wrong note in a song, the breath between sentences, the moment in someone's eyes when they forget to perform. That is the pulse beneath the simulation. And yet, Baudrillard offers no comfort. He does not call you back to some true world. He suggests that perhaps there is no return, that even resistance becomes part of the system, that the desert has expanded too far, and what we call real is now only another aesthetic, sold back to us at a premium. So where does that leave you? Maybe here, lying in the dark, your eyes open, your room faintly humming. You remember a time before all this, or maybe you just imagine it. The memory might be false, but the longing is real, and in that longing, you are not lost. You are awake. You begin to notice the outlines again, not the ones on your screen, but the ones in your breath, in your skin, in the subtle tremor of your thoughts as they resist narration. You begin to crave silence, not as absence, but as possibility, not as emptiness, but as uncurated space. You cannot escape the desert, but you can walk in it awake. You can stop mistaking the glow for the sun. You can stop mistaking the menu for the meal. You can start asking, what lies outside the simulation? And even if the answer never comes, the question itself is your revolt. Tonight, let the screens fade. Let the noise decay. Return not to the real, but to the real question. And in that question, perhaps, you will find a different kind of presence. Not pure, not perfect, but yours. The fold. At first, it feels like déjà vu. You're thinking something, and then realize you've thought it before, but differently. Folded into another moment, another shape, another time, like a line that loops inward, like a surface that turns back on itself again and again, not flat, not circular, but folded. You are not a point. You are not even a path. You are a fold. Gottfried Leibniz believed that reality is made not of atoms or elements, but of monads, indivisible units of being, each containing the whole world from its unique perspective. Each monad is like a closed room, a singularity, but what lies within it is not simplicity. It is infinite interiority. The monad is not flat. It is folded inward, infinitely, like a universe in a drop of thought. Centuries later, Gilles Deleuze takes this metaphor and unfolds it further. To him, the fold is not just a description of matter, it is a mode of becoming, a way the world resists being reduced. There is no hard boundary between inside and outside, no clean split between subject and object. There are only surfaces, and those surfaces fold. You are not separate from the world. You are its fold. The skin is not a wall, it is a membrane. Thought is not a container, it is a ripple. Identity is not a fixed shape. It is an ongoing curving, pleating, refolding. And in each fold, something is hidden, not to conceal, but to contain. There is no final unraveling, no core to reach, only more folds. You feel this, though you may not have named it. You try to explain your pain and realize words can only reach so far, because your pain is folded into memory, into gesture, into your mother's voice, into things you never told anyone. You try to describe who you are and hear yourself speaking in spirals, not lying, but looping, because who you are depends on who's asking, on who's listening, on who you were yesterday, and who you fear to become tomorrow. You are not singular. You are multiply-folded. Even your quietest thought is a fold within culture, language, childhood, biology, time. But this is not disintegration. This is texture. The fold resists flattening. It says, no, I will not be reduced to a function, to a name, to a statistic. Even a simple sheet of paper, when folded, begins to resist. It changes direction. It occupies space differently. It becomes more than itself. So too with being. To live with awareness of the fold is to abandon the hunger for final answers. It is to accept that clarity comes in layers, that every truth you find has depth, and beneath it, another truth, not a contradiction, but a continuation. You think you've resolved something, and then it reappears, differently curved. You think you've healed, and the wound reopens, but in another form. You think you've arrived, but there's always another layer. This is not failure. It is movement. And perhaps tonight, in the stillness of your room, you can feel it again. The subtle curl of thought, the way memory coils around sensation, the way meaning folds into silence. You are not lost. You are nested. Inside of you is not confusion, but complexity. Not noise, but woven signal. Not chaos, but folds. And the task is not to flatten them, not to iron your soul into legibility, but to explore the topology of your becoming, with care, with slowness, with awe. The fold does not end. It only becomes more precise. You are not a thing. You are a fold in time, in language, in light. And that is enough. The gaze. There's a moment when you turn off the lights and the room doesn't vanish. It just changes. You feel the space still holding you. But now, something feels different. You are not alone. Not really. There's no one there. And yet, there is a gaze. Not a pair of eyes. Not a person. But the sense of being seen. From somewhere. From nowhere. And you shift, slightly, even in solitude. Jacques Lacan did not speak of the gaze as simple vision. It is not just someone looking at you. The gaze is a structure, an event. It emerges when you become aware that you are object in someone else's world, that you are not just a subject who sees, you are also something seen, interpreted, framed. You walk past a mirror and catch your own eyes, not from inside, but from outside. You hear your voice recorded and flinch at the strangeness of it. You post a photo and begin imagining how it looks to someone else. That is the gaze. It breaks the illusion of unity, the comforting lie that your self is whole, stable, continuous. The gaze reminds you that you are split, that part of you always exists elsewhere in the image the other has of you. And this is not just discomfort, it is foundational. Lacan claimed that subjectivity itself, your I, is born through misrecognition. That when you first saw your reflection as a child and identified with it, you created a fiction, a seamless self. That fiction has followed you ever since. But the gaze disturbs it, not violently, but surgically. It shows the crack between the image and the thing. You become self-conscious, not when you look, but when you feel looked at. It is then that your body shifts from being a tool of your will to a spectacle. Something to be judged, measured, desired, or rejected. And the paradox is, the gaze is not always real. It does not need a watcher. You carry it with you. A phantom perspective stitched into your mind. You anticipate it. You internalize it. You obey it. Why do you sit straighter when no one's around? Why do you rehearse conversations that will never happen? Why do you feel shame in dreams? Because the gaze is not just social. It is psychic. It is the other within you, the symbolic web that defines your place in language, culture, desire. And yet, the gaze is not only a prison, it is also the mirror in which you recognize that you are more than just yourself, that you are entangled, that your being is not sealed. In art, in love, in fear. The gaze flickers, in a stranger's glance, in a camera lens, in the sudden sensation that you are exposed in ways you don't understand. And in that moment, you glimpse something terrifying and beautiful, that your identity is not yours alone. It is co-authored. It is echoed. Tonight, in the quiet hour, you may feel it again, the way the darkness itself seems to observe, the way your mind divides, one part thinking, the other watching the thinker. You are both observer and observed. You are never fully alone. And maybe that's not a curse. Maybe in that subtle tension, you are reminded that you are not finished, that you are still being seen into being. The mirror stage. You pass by the mirror at night. Maybe you glance by accident. Maybe you stop. For a moment, you see yourself, but not as you feel from within. There's something in the reflection that's sharper, stranger, more solid than your inner sense of self. And you wonder, who is that? Lacan believed that the I, the subject, the ego, the person you believe yourself to be, begins not with thought, but with recognition, or rather, a misrecognition. When a child first sees themselves in a mirror, they are captivated. Suddenly, there is a whole figure, a complete form, cohesive, contained. But the child doesn't yet feel that way from the inside. Inside, they are fragmentation, hunger, sensation, confusion. The mirror offers an illusion of unity, and in that illusion, the ego is born. You recognize yourself in the image, but the image is not you. It is a surface, a shell. And yet, from that point on, you begin to become what you see. This is the paradox. Your sense of self is founded in something outside of you. You are not born into coherence. You assemble it through borrowed shapes. The mirror stage never ends. It is not just a childhood moment. It repeats again and again, each time you search for yourself in someone else's eyes, in a screen, in a voice message, in a carefully composed sentence. You are always trying to see yourself, but never directly, always through the gaze, the echo, the reflection. And each time, a part of you gets rewritten. The mirror is not just glass. It is culture, language, roles, ideals. Every image you cling to, every version of yourself you try to perfect, is a mirror you mistake for essence. You dress the way you want to be seen. You speak the way you hope to be interpreted. You perform, not out of deceit, but because you were never given a raw, untouched self. Lacan called this process alienation, not as loneliness, but as structural distance. You are alienated from yourself through the very act of becoming someone. And it is not a flaw. It is a function. You had to split to form identity. You had to see yourself from without in order to narrate anything within. But there is a cost. You begin to believe the image. You forget the difference between the projection and the presence. You chase wholeness in the external, in mirrors that shimmer but do not hold. And yet, not all is lost. There is something in this fragmentation that can liberate you. When you realize that the ego is a fiction, not a lie, but a story, you are free to rewrite. You do not have to be what you were mirrored into. You can bend the glass. You can distort the reflection. You can stop trying to find yourself in the surface and begin listening to the interior noise, the parts that don't fit, don't align, don't resolve. Tonight, in the dark, with no mirror, no screen, no voice but your own, you might feel it, the echo beneath the ego, the hum of being unobserved, the feeling of not knowing who you are, and for once, not needing to. That is not emptiness. That is origin. The mirror gave you form, but only in its shatter can you begin to move. The Noosphere. Sometimes at night, when all the voices fall away, you feel it. Not just your thoughts, but something larger. A hum behind consciousness. A presence made not of flesh, but of signals. The strange weight of knowing that you're not alone, not just in the social sense, but in the cognitive one. That your mind is one thread in a web that covers the world. The ancients spoke of spheres, concentric layers around the earth, lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere. But in the 20th century, a new one was proposed. The Noosphere, the sphere of thought. Not a metaphor, but a phase. A real, emergent layer of global intelligence, forming slowly, invisibly, like a membrane of meaning. Vladimir Vernadsky saw it as the next evolutionary stage. Just as life once reshaped the earth through biology, so too would human consciousness reshape it through knowledge, language, intention. Teilhard de Chardin, the priest paleontologist, went further. He saw the Noosphere as a planetary mind, a kind of divine culmination, where the cosmos becomes self-aware, through us. But this is not utopian. It is not peaceful. The Noosphere is not made of light. It is made of contradiction. It contains every algorithm, every lie, every gesture of love, every scream into the void. It is the collective residue of thought. Every message you send, every post, every query, every name spoken aloud and stored, becomes sediment in this layer. The earth now breathes ideas, and it does not forget. You feel this every time you pick up your device. When your thoughts echo someone else's. When your dream feels shaped by something you read. when your silence is already calculated by a machine. It is no longer your mind alone that thinks. It is a mind within a mind. The Noosphere is growing. Billions of neurons, not biological, but digital, fire across continents. Information loops, reflects, mutates. A planetary nervous system, electric and indifferent. And yet, there is hope here too, because while this layer of thought can be polluted, it can also evolve. It is not finished. It is shaped by intention, by awareness, by care. You are not merely a consumer in the Noosphere. You are a node, a creator, a filter, a pulse. And this means you bear responsibility. Your attention matters. Your silence matters. The tone of your thought ripples outward, whether you see it or not. You are not just in the Noosphere. You are shaping it. Each time you speak truth, you clarify a fragment. Each time you reflect instead of react, you purify a signal. Each time you love, quietly, deeply, you soften the charge. Tonight, as the world falls into its artificial sleep, screens still glowing in empty rooms, you might pause and listen, not to the noise, but to the space behind it, to the silent breathing of a planet that now dreams in code and memory and metaphor. The Noosphere is not a sky. It is not above you. It surrounds. It pulses. It waits. What it becomes depends, in part, on what you allow yourself to become. You are one voice, but not alone. You are one thought, but not disconnected. You are one soul, but not sealed. The Noosphere is not yet complete. It is still folding, still tuning, still listening. And tonight, it hears you too. The Ontological Turn. You're used to explaining why the world is the way it is, why people believe what they believe, why some things make sense and others don't. You map, describe, compare. But late at night, when the maps dissolve, a different question creeps in. What if the world isn't one? What if reality itself differs? This is the beginning of the ontological turn, not a theory, a refusal to flatten the world into one model, one logic, one story. For centuries, Western thought has asked, how do we know what we know? This is the domain of epistemology, the science of knowledge. But the ontological turn asks something older, something more disquieting. Not how do we know, but what is? What if reality is not a shared container into which different cultures place their beliefs, but a shifting field shaped by those beliefs? What if not all humans live in the same world with different interpretations, but in different worlds? This is not relativism. It is ontological pluralism. It is the recognition that reality might not be singular, that being itself may differ from place to place, mind to mind, ritual to ritual. The jaguar, in one worldview, is not an animal. It is a person, a kin, a spirit. The mountain is not a pile of rock. It sees. It listens. It has its own obligations. You can dismiss these as metaphors. You can translate them into your language of atoms and biology. But the ontological turn warns. Translation can be a kind of colonization. What if you stop explaining other worlds in terms of your own? What if you let their reality stand, not as symbols, but as realities? You live in a world built on a particular ontology, one of objects, properties, quantities, categories. But you didn't choose this framework. You inherited it. You enforce it every time you say, that's just belief, or that's not how things work. The ontological turn cracks that ground. It whispers, your world is not the world. It's one of many, a strong one, a loud one, but not the only one. And this isn't just an anthropological concern. It touches the deepest part of your being. because maybe even your own self isn't as stable as you think. Maybe you are also plural, layered, partial. The mind that dreams and the mind that wakes, are they the same being? The you that speaks in a crowd and the you that lies sleepless at 3 a.m., do they dwell in the same ontology? The ontological turn gives you permission not to escape the world, but to question the shape it's taken. To ask, what have I assumed to be real? What have I declared impossible? Not because it is, but because I was taught so. It is a form of philosophical humility, to stop policing reality, to let being be strange again. Tonight, in the hush of night, you may feel it. The weight of this chair, the flicker of your breath, the silence that wraps your thoughts. And you might wonder, what if this too is only one version of being? What if the world, just beyond perception, folds differently, feels differently, thinks otherwise? The ontological turn doesn't give you answers. It gives you openings. Not clarity, but depth. Not proof, but presence. And in that presence, you may finally feel what it's like to stand not above the world as knower, but inside it as co-participant. Being, not as object, but as relation, as texture, as call. And you, not as observer, but as part of the ongoing question. The other you never really see yourself. Not fully. Even in the mirror, what looks back is not quite you. It's a reverse image, a silent mime, a sculpture of light. You have never looked into your own eyes the way others do. You have never stood across from yourself. And yet, you are built by these glances, not just biologically, but existentially. You are shaped, at times carved, by the presence of others. Their gaze is not just observation, it is definition. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote of the look, that unbearable moment when you become aware of being watched, and in that instant, you are transformed from subject into object. You feel your body stiffen, your words hesitate. You begin to edit yourself. The other, just by seeing you, creates a version of you that is no longer fully yours. But this is not merely social anxiety. It is ontological. You are given back to yourself through others. You do not invent your identity alone in a dark room. You discover it in contrast, in tension, with the other. It is in their refusal to be you that you become aware of being yourself. You are not a closed system. You are porous. Ideas, fears, gestures, language, all bleed in from outside. You speak the words you've heard. You dream with the symbols of others. Even rebellion, even solitude, is often reaction to someone else. So where does the boundary begin? You are never just I. You are always I in relation to the friend, the enemy, the lover, the stranger, the passerby. In their existence, you locate your own. Emmanuel Levinas saw the face of the other as an infinite ethical command, a silent, irreversible responsibility. To look into another's eyes is to be summoned, to be called out of yourself. But what happens when the other is too much? When you are buried in reflections, lost in performances, torn between masks? What happens when you can no longer hear your own voice beneath the echoes? And yet, without the other, what are you? There is a paradox here. You need the other to know yourself, but in their gaze, you risk becoming only what they see. You walk a tightrope between solitude and subjugation, between authenticity and alienation. Every relationship is a mirror, but some mirrors distort, some mirrors seduce. The other is not always a person. Sometimes it's a system, a culture, a code, a screen. The infinite scroll of strangers whose curated lives shape your sense of failure, the algorithm that knows your desires before you do, the crowd that makes you feel more alone. But the other is also a gift. They rupture your illusions. They remind you that your world is not the world. They bring difference, dissonance, friction, and through it, clarity. You may never be complete, but in your response to the other, you become coherent, human. And perhaps the task is not to escape the other, but to meet them without dissolving, to say, I see you, and I am not you. To say, your gaze does not define me, but I will not pretend it doesn't shape me. The self is a conversation, not a monologue. And the other is the echo that teaches you the sound of your own voice. The Panopticon. You wake in the night, and for a moment, you don't know why. There is no sound, no movement, but you feel it, that invisible pressure, like being watched by something that has no eyes. You lie still and realize the watcher is already inside you. The Panopticon was once an architectural idea, a prison designed by Jeremy Bentham. A circle of cells, each facing inward toward a central tower. From that tower, one guard could observe all prisoners, or at least make them believe they were being observed. Here's the trick. The prisoner never knows if they're being watched, and so they begin to behave as if they are. Surveillance becomes self-regulation. The camera doesn't need to blink if you imagine it blinking. Michel Foucault took this blueprint and turned it into metaphor. He saw the Panopticon not just in prisons, but in schools, hospitals, workplaces, social institutions. It was no longer just architecture. It was a system of power. Quiet, invisible, internalized. You don't need walls when people build them in their minds. You begin to police yourself. You stand straighter when you enter a room. You smile just enough. You modify your laughter. You censor your thoughts before they ever reach your tongue. And soon, the guard is no longer in the tower. The guard is you. But you were never told when the shift happened. You were never handed a rulebook. You simply learned over time that certain expressions cost more than others. That deviation has a price. That the self is safest when edited. And so you shrink. You blur. You dim your edges. You become legible. We live now in a digital panopticon. The tower is your phone, your profile, your cloud. You perform into invisible lenses, likes, views, shares, unsure who is watching, but always watching yourself. You are algorithmically refined, subconsciously adjusted, privately exposed. You write a message and rewrite it 3 times before pressing send. You take a photo, but check the background, just in case. You say what is true, but only if it won't disturb the feed. The power is no longer violent. It is soft. It coaxes. It rewards compliance with visibility, attention, comfort. And yet, behind that comfort is a slow erasure, not of your body, but of your unpredictability, your refusal, your mystery. And here's the quiet terror. You no longer need the tower to feel its gaze. Even alone, you perform. Even in the dark, you behave. You have internalized the observer. You carry them like a ghost. So where does resistance begin? Maybe in silence, maybe in privacy reclaimed, not in hiding, but in unmirroring. Maybe in acts that go unshared. Words said, but not posted. Emotions felt without translation. Maybe in the moment, you realize that your truest self does not need to be watched to exist. Tonight, the room is dark. There are no eyes but your own. You can release the posture. Let your breath fall into its natural rhythm. Let your face become expressionless. Let your thoughts speak in voices too quiet to be commodified. There is no performance here, no algorithm, no audience, only the feeling of being, not watched, not judged, but simply being. The Panopticon is powerful, but it is not complete. Some parts of you still live outside its reach, and in those parts, you are free, not because no one sees you, but because you've stopped needing to be seen. The paradox of inquiry. You lie still. Your mind stirs. A question floats in the dark, not fully formed, just a shape, a pressure, something missing, but you can't name what. You're not even sure what you're searching for, only that something isn't there, and you wonder, how do you find something you've never seen? This is Meno's paradox. Plato presents it through the voice of a student, Meno, as a challenge to Socrates. He asks, how will you search for something if you don't know what it is? If you know it already, there's no need to search. If you don't know it, how will you recognize it when you find it? It's a philosophical trap, a puzzle folded into the act of questioning itself, a mind loop. To inquire, to truly search, requires some kind of orientation. But orientation comes from knowing. And yet, the whole point of inquiry is to reach what you do not yet know. It's as if you're thrown into a dark forest and asked to find a hidden flower. But you've never seen the flower. You don't know its color. You don't know its scent. You don't even know if it's real. Still, you begin walking. Why? What compels you? Socrates answers Meno not with definitions, but with a myth, the idea of anamnesis, or recollection, that the soul already knows all things, and that learning is a kind of remembering. But this is not a theory to prove. It's a gesture, a way to protect inquiry from despair. Because if you believe the paradox, truly, it freezes you. If you can only seek what you already partially possess, how can you ever touch the truly unknown? But maybe the paradox is not a dead end. Maybe it's a mirror, a reminder that searching is never clean, that knowing and not knowing are not opposites. They are entwined. You don't begin with certainty. You begin with intuition, attention, a hunger, a shape of absence. You feel it when something doesn't sit right, when the answers you've memorized no longer soothe, when your life fits, but feels wrong in a way you can't articulate. That's the paradox at work, the impulse to move without coordinates, to reach without a fixed target. And maybe the act of inquiry isn't about finding an object at all. Maybe it's about becoming the kind of mind that recognizes meaning when it appears. You didn't know you were searching for this person until you met them. You didn't know you were hungry for this idea until it broke something open. You didn't know your question had been waiting until an answer rang true. So how do you inquire in a world where the unknown hides even from your own thoughts? You start with discomfort, with contradiction, with the question that feels too big to phrase. You follow what stirs, not what satisfies. You risk being wrong, not once, but constantly. Inquiry, real inquiry, is not linear. It loops, it falters, it folds back on itself. And each time, if you're paying attention, the question changes shape. You may never find the flower, but you may find that the act of searching made you someone who sees differently, someone who knows how to feel the weight of silence, someone who can sit with the unknown without needing to murder it with answers. Tonight, as your breath slows, you might remember a time when you said, "I don't know," and for once, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like space. It felt like beginning. The paradox remains. But maybe that's what keeps the door open. Maybe the mind was never meant to move in straight lines. Maybe we inquire, not because we know, but because we sense that something else is possible. And that is enough. Let the question keep unfolding. The problem of evil. You lie awake, and it visits you again, not as a scream, but as a quiet, insistent question. Why? Why this pain? Why now? Why here? You're not angry. You're not even searching for meaning anymore. You just want to understand how a world so full of beauty can also carry this much shadow. This is not a new question. It is one of the oldest. It echoes through burnt cities, empty cradles, unanswered prayers. It murmurs beneath hospital lights, in the silence after sirens, in the eyes of those who've seen too much too young. If God is good, if God is just, if God is real, why is there evil? This is the problem of evil, the central riddle of theodicy, and it haunts every tradition, every theology, every attempt to reconcile divinity with suffering. There are answers, of course. Some say, free will. Evil exists because we are free to choose, and without choice, there is no love, no virtue, no humanity. But then you see the child in rubble, the stranger betrayed, the disease that grows silently inside a good person, and you wonder, what choice did they make? Others say, this is a test, a refinement, a larger plan, that we are too small to see the full tapestry, that suffering is part of something greater. But this feels hollow in the moment. Try telling that to someone who's just buried half their world. The greater plan can sound like a cruel abstraction. Still others speak of dualism, two forces locked in cosmic tension, light and dark, creation and destruction. But then, what kind of God needs an enemy? The most unsettling answer may be silence. Some thinkers, Camus for instance, abandoned the search for reconciliation altogether. He saw the world's absurdity and refused to smooth it. If there is a God, he said, and he allows this, then he is not worthy of worship. If there is no God, then we must still choose to be kind. But even silence does not stop the question. And perhaps that is the real shape of this problem. Not a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror to be held. Maybe the problem of evil doesn't indict God. Maybe it indicts us for demanding that the universe behave like a courtroom, like a balance sheet, like a parent who never disappoints. Because pain is real, and it's not always deserved. And no theory, no system, no doctrine can make the tear in your chest feel righteous. But here's what remains. Even in a world with evil, or perhaps because of it, people still light candles, still reach out, still pray, still love. Not because they were promised a reward, but because something in them refuses to surrender to cruelty. You've seen it. In the nurse who whispers gently to someone dying, in the hand that doesn't let go, even after everything's been taken, in the stranger who stops. These acts are not solutions. They don't fix the world, but they are answers, not to the intellect, but to the heart. You may never understand why the world holds both awe and horror, why the same sky watches over a wedding and a war, why some prayers feel heard and others vanish like breath. But you are still here, still breathing, still able to choose, even in the dark. And maybe, just maybe, your refusal to turn away, to go numb, to become cruel in the face of cruelty, is the beginning of a different kind of faith. Not faith in a plan, but faith in response. The problem of evil may never be solved, but it can be faced. And in that facing, You are no longer just a question. You become a presence. Tonight, if the question returns again, let it. Sit with it. Do not rush it away. It does not need an answer. It only needs a witness. The simulacrum. You walk through the city at night. Neon flickers. Faces glow behind glass. Everything feels familiar, but slightly off. The signs point to things you've never touched. The words feel rehearsed. The smiles hover, then vanish. You wonder, is any of this real? Not false, not fake, just copied too many times. Jean Baudrillard called it the simulacrum, a copy without an original. Not a lie, but something more disturbing, an image that no longer refers to anything beneath it. Once, there was a thing. Then, a symbol of the thing. Then, a copy of the symbol. And now, just the surface, endlessly reflecting itself. We have not lost reality. We have drowned it in its own reflections. You don't drink the coffee. You drink the brand. You don't see a sunset. You frame it for a story. You don't feel your body. You track it as data. Experience has been displaced by its representation. We live in a world not of things, but of images pretending to be things. Baudrillard calls this hyperreality. It's not deception. It's saturation. You no longer ask, is this true? You ask, does this feel real enough to pass? And here's the twist. The simulation is not imposed. We build it. We prefer it. We choose the curated over the raw. We choose the seamless over the broken. We choose the filtered face over the human one. Even identity becomes simulation. We perform ourselves. We edit our emotions. We simulate intimacy. We scroll through strangers simulating lives we secretly know are also simulated. And yet, we believe. Not because we're naive, but because the simulation is comforting. It wraps us in smoothness. It shields us from the weight of the real. But something in you resists. You feel it in the fatigue after too much screen. You feel it when you speak and hear your words echo as slogans. You feel it in the uncanny calm of a world too perfect to trust. You feel it when you reach for something real and realize you're not sure what that means anymore. Baudrillard doesn't give you a solution. He holds up the mirror and lets it fracture. He says, we live in a world where there is more and more information and less meaning. And perhaps that's the most honest thing we can say. But the simulacrum isn't total. Cracks appear. In silence. In mistakes. In moments that don't fit the script. A tremble in someone's voice. An unedited laugh. A night where the phone stays off and the world doesn't vanish. These are not escapes, but ruptures. Glimpses beneath the surface. You won't find the original world again. There may never have been one. But you can find presence. You can find awareness. To know when you're inside the simulation. To remember what isn't being shown. To resist collapsing everything into symbol. Tonight, as the screens dim, you might feel the pull. To scroll, to fill, to perform. But maybe, just this once, you stay still. You listen for the sound beneath the soundtrack. You look for the edge of the reflection. You remember that not everything needs to be captured. The simulacrum is a mirror. But you do not have to live inside the glass. The Transvaluation of Values. Some nights you wake up at 3 a.m. and stare at the ceiling. The room is dark, quiet, and still. Yet something inside you isn't. A quiet revolt murmurs in your chest. The thought forms slowly, like a shadow growing against the wall. What if the things you were taught to value are wrong? Since childhood, you were given a map. It had names on it, good, evil, success, failure, pride, shame, sin, virtue. You did not choose these words. They were handed to you by teachers, by books, by frightened adults trying to keep order in a world they didn't fully understand. And you believed. We all did. Belief is easier than chaos. But what happens when the map no longer matches the terrain? What happens when you climb to the top, only to find the summit empty? When you're praised for something that feels like cowardice, or punished for something that felt like courage? Nietzsche called for a transvaluation of values, not a simple reversal of good and evil, but a deep existential re-examination of the framework itself. Not what is considered good, but who decided and why. He saw morality not as a universal truth, but as a structure built by the weary, the afraid, the obedient. Slave morality, he called it, a system born from resentment, from the powerless labeling their weakness as virtue, humility, meekness, obedience. These were not universal goods, he said, but survival strategies. And what of the other morality? The one of strength, of creation, of becoming, the master morality. It values what expands life, vitality, will, courage, laughter in the face of dread. Not cruelty, but intensity. Not dominance, but self-overcoming. You may feel this conflict in yourself, a quiet tug-of-war between the life you were told to live and the one that pulses behind your ribs at night. That subtle guilt when you say no. That sudden thrill when you act without permission. The breath of relief when you realize no one is really watching. What if your kindness is a mask for fear? What if your humility is a form of hiding? What if your morality is not yours at all? To revalue values is terrifying. It is a lonely act. There is no handbook for creating a new self, but there is a freedom in it too, a chance to become the author of your own ethical grammar, to stop living as a reflection and begin living as a flame. This does not mean becoming monstrous. It does not mean destroying others. It means refusing to live as a sleepwalker in someone else's dream. It means asking of every virtue, does this make me more alive or less? And you, lying there in the night, hearing your breath rise and fall, you are not exempt. This is your task too. Not tomorrow, not after another decade of performance. Now you may find that some things you called sins are just unlived truths, that some of your virtues are wounds dressed as medals, that joy is not something to deserve, but something to dare. There is no reward for waking up, no applause for questioning the foundations. But there is this, a moment when your eyes open, really open, and you see that your life is still unwritten, that you have been playing a role and the curtain is slipping, that the world is quieter than you thought and more flexible. And in that space, in that breath between illusion and decision, something stirs. Not a god, not a command, but a laugh, a low, wild, ancient laugh, the kind that lives under your skin, waiting to be remembered. You are not here to obey. You are not here to preserve. You are here to create. So ask yourself now, before sleep takes you back into the borrowed structures of the day, what do I truly value? And what have I merely accepted? What do I kneel to? And why? The night is long, and in that length there is time. Time to unlearn. Time to become dangerous in the best way possible. Time to revalue. The veil of Maya. There is a softness to the world when you see it just before sleep. Edges blur, sounds fade, thoughts untangle. In that liminal quiet, when consciousness begins to loosen its grip You may briefly wonder, is this real, or is it merely the latest shimmer behind the veil? The ancients called it Maya, not as a name, but as a word that trembles under its own weight. Illusion, they said, a grand tapestry of appearance, where all things, your hands, the sky, your grief, your joy, are folded into a dream so convincing it forgets it's asleep. What if you have never seen the world, only its mask? What if all your senses are filters, not windows, lenses ground by biology, culture, memory, trauma? What if there is no color, no sound, no shape outside your skull, only wavelengths and vibrations, translated by this strange interpreter you call self? Imagine touching the world only through gloves that never come off. Imagine looking through a mirror that reflects not what is, but what you expect. That is the veil. It is not placed before you. It is you. The philosophers tried to name it. Schopenhauer saw the will pulsing behind it, raw and hungry. Plato dreamed of shadows dancing on cave walls. Kant measured categories of thought like bars on a cell. Each tried to press their face against the veil, hoping to glimpse the thing in itself, naked, trembling, real. But perhaps the veil is not a prison. Perhaps it's protection. Imagine looking directly at truth, unmediated. No story, no metaphor, no narrative to soften the blow. Could you survive it? Could your mind, built for stories and symbols, even recognize the real without immediately dressing it in myth? There are moments, rare and terrible, when the veil slips. In grief, in awe, in certain silences. When time dissolves and the world stares back without blinking. You feel it then, a glimpse of something too vast to name. A presence behind the performance. It doesn't speak. It doesn't need to. You might chase that feeling your whole life. Through meditation, through psychedelics, through love or despair. But the more you seek, the more the veil shifts. It is clever. It knows you are looking, and it changes the scenery just enough to keep you distracted. Not malicious, just evasive. Like a dream that doesn't want to be remembered. And yet, something in you remembers. You are not always this. You are not always veiled. There is a stillness behind your eyes that does not flicker when the lights change. A watcher behind the watcher. A silence that is not absence, but source. The veil is not to be destroyed. It is to be recognized, seen as a veil. Only then does it become transparent. Only then do you begin, not to see what lies behind, but to know that there is something behind. And maybe that's enough. After all, even illusions cast real shadows. The will to believe. You don't know. You've read, thought, hesitated. You've walked the perimeter of the question again and again. You've weighed the evidence, what little there is, and still, something in you leans forward, not with certainty, but with willingness. This is the space William James tried to illuminate, a space not of proof, but of belief, not as dogma, not as delusion, but as a right. When the stakes are real, the options are live, and waiting would mean missing the moment. The will to believe. James wasn't arguing for blind faith. He knew the dangers, but he also knew that neutrality is a choice, and that in some of life's deepest questions, God, love, purpose, moral action, waiting for empirical certainty is the same as saying no. And sometimes, no is not the safer path. It's just the colder one. You face choices that cannot wait for more data. You must love someone before you know how the story ends. You must stand for something before the outcome is clear. You must speak when the silence feels easier. And when you withhold belief, you are still acting, still choosing. Skepticism is not absence. It is a mask, a stance with its own consequences. James saw that life is not a controlled experiment. It is a risk. And belief, at its core, is the courage to step into uncertainty, not because you are naive, but because you are alive. He wrote, "Our passional nature not only lawfully may, but must decide an option between propositions, whenever it is a genuine option that cannot by its nature be decided on intellectual grounds." Translated, when you must choose and reason can't decide, your heart is allowed to speak. You know this already. You've said yes when your mind still doubted. You've walked forward when there was no map. You've trusted something intangible, a gesture, a silence, a pull. And maybe it changed everything. The will to believe is not permission to be reckless. It is permission to be human, to acknowledge that there are decisions that define you, and you must make them before the facts arrive. Or else, the moment passes. This is not anti-reason. It is a form of honest reason, one that knows its own limits and refuses to let fear of being wrong keep you from living. Tonight, you may feel it. The quiet pressure of a choice you haven't made. The haunting what if at the edge of your thoughts. The trembling at the border of risk and desire. You will not get a sign. You will not get enough proof. And still, the moment asks, will you step? Not blindly, not carelessly, but with full awareness that you might be wrong, and with full conviction that you're willing to live with that. That is the will to believe. Not arrogance, not illusion, but the freedom to say, this is my leap. And perhaps, as you lie down in the dark, you remember, you've believed before. And it broke you, and it made you, and you're still here, still capable, still open, still willing. The will to power. There are nights when you feel the stir beneath the stillness. Your heart beats too loud for the silence. The air feels thick, electric. You are not afraid, not exactly, but something in you wants to rise, something restless, something unsatisfied with surviving. That is the will, not the will to live, not the will to safety, but the will to power. Nietzsche saw it, pulsing behind every action, every choice, every failure and triumph. He did not believe we are driven by the need to persist, like machines running from death. He believed we are driven by the urge to overcome, to expand, to shape, to climb, not because we must, but because we can. The will to power is not about domination, not about brute control. That's a shallow reading. It is about becoming. It is the force that moves through a seed as it splits the earth, through a voice that breaks silence, through a mind that refuses its old beliefs. It is the whisper that says, you are more than this, even when this is already enough to survive. The weak, Nietzsche said, are not merely those without strength. They are those who lie to themselves about why they live, who call fear morality, who turn obedience into virtue, who shrink their desires to fit what is permitted, and then say they are content. But the will to power does not ask for permission. It does not explain itself. It is the push beyond the edge, the instinct that says, I will not remain what I was. You feel it in your boredom, the kind that burns, not numbs. You feel it when you sabotage comfort just to feel alive again. You feel it when you fall, and instead of staying down, you build something out of the impact. The will to power is creative, not reactive. It does not wait for meaning. It makes it, not through explanation, but through style, through risk, through living as if each act were a signature. And yes, it is dangerous, because it asks you to stop hiding behind why and start choosing how. It asks you to abandon the safety of being right and embrace the terror of becoming real. But what's the alternative? To sleepwalk through another day, to repeat your lines in someone else's play, to pretend that your deepest hunger is just a phase. You were not made to maintain. You were made to transgress. And this isn't about arrogance, it's about honesty. The honesty to say, I want more. Not more things, but more being, more depth, more height, more you. Tonight, as the room darkens and the world quiets, you may hear that voice again. Not a shout, not a call, just a quiet certainty that you are not finished, that your edges are still raw for a reason, that something inside you refuses to be tamed. This is not madness. This is not ego. This is the will to power, and it is not out there. It is you, beneath the stories, beneath the roles, beneath the fear. It is your life, asking to be lived on its own terms, not for the world, not for applause, but because to not rise would be a kind of death. So rise. The zone of proximal development. There's a place you visit often, though you rarely name it. A fragile place, half-built, a little beyond comfort, but not beyond reach. It's the edge of what you know, where your fingers stretch towards something not yet yours, but almost. The zone between what you can do and what you could. Vygotsky called it the zone of proximal development. It is not a location. It's a relation, not a measurement. A tension. It's the space between your current self and your possible self, not alone, but in connection. A bridge suspended between solitude and collaboration. A place where you are invited to become. You are not static. You are scaffolding. At any given moment, there are things you can do without effort, automatic, mastered. And then, there are things that lie just out of reach. Too far to grab, too close to ignore. That's where growth lives. But here's the secret. You don't get there alone. The zone of proximal development is not a call for independence. It is a recognition that becoming yourself often requires the presence of another. Not to carry you, not to dictate, but to reach in, to hold steady, to reflect possibility. Sometimes that other is a teacher, sometimes a friend, sometimes a version of you that already exists in imagination. You feel it when someone gives you just enough support, not too much, just enough to keep the fall from breaking you, but not enough to take away your own steps. The art of guidance, the science of space. It is not hand-holding, it is hand-extending. You have lived there before when you first tried to speak and someone responded, not with correction, but with patience. When you first tried to draw what you felt and someone said, keep going. When you failed, but someone stayed near, silent and steady. And you tried again. That was the zone. You weren't ready, but you weren't unready either. You were in between, and the in-between is sacred. Vygotsky believed this space is where learning truly happens, not in repetition, not in reward, but in this fragile collaboration with what's just beyond you. And now, maybe you feel stuck, like you've plateaued, like you're orbiting the same patterns, like your thoughts bounce off the same walls. That might mean you've stayed too long in what you already know. Tonight, in the hush of sleep, you can ask, where's my edge? Who stands near it with me? What could I do? Not alone, not yet, but soon, with help. And maybe you realize The zone is not just about skill. It's about courage. It's about the willingness to move toward discomfort with the faith that someone or something will meet you halfway. You are never too old for this, never too complete. The scaffold never disappears. It only moves. The zone of proximal development is not a phase. It's the permanent architecture of becoming. And tonight, while the world sleeps, you are invited to step toward the next rung, not because you must, but because it's there, waiting, quietly, faithfully, like a hand in the dark. Affordance Theory. You reach for the cup without thinking. Your hand curves before you notice it. The weight, the heat, the angle, none of it is calculated. You don't see an object. You feel an invitation. This is what James Gibson called an affordance. Not a thing, not a thought, but a possibility for action. You see a chair, not just as a shape, but as something to sit on. You see a doorway, as something to pass through. You see a branch, and somewhere in you, the idea of grasping stirs. You don't perceive objects. You perceive opportunities. Perception, then, is not passive. It is active orientation, a form of readiness. The world is not neutral. It is textured with potential. It pulls you. It speaks in silent verbs. And you are not a floating mind. You are a body in a landscape, a moving center of action, with limbs, weight, rhythm, intention. The theory of affordances breaks the wall between perception and behavior. It says, you don't first see, then think, then act. You perceive through acting. You move as you notice. You notice as you move. The environment does not simply contain you. It offers itself, based on who and how you are. The same rock affords different actions to a child, a bird, a climber. The same room feels full of possibility or emptiness, depending on your mood, your memory, your need. And so, affordances are relational, not in your mind, not in the world, but between. This is what makes the theory so strange and so honest. It does not ask you to describe what you see. It asks, what does this thing let you do? And that's not just physical. A quiet street might afford reflection. A book might afford forgetting. A face might afford confession or withdrawal. You live not in a static world, but in a web of affordances. They shift with your mood, with your past, with your fears. And that means you're never really stuck in the same room twice. The affordances change. You change. But modern life often dulls this sensitivity. You move through spaces designed to numb. Hallways that don't invite pause. Interfaces that don't invite thought. Chairs you sit in, but never feel. You begin to perceive without possibility. And that is the beginning of disconnection. To live deeply is to notice what the world affords you, and what you afford it in return. Affordance theory brings you back to the body, to the quiet intelligence of your hands, to the dance between what you are and what is there. And maybe tonight, in the still room around you, you sense it again. The way the window offers distance, the way the floor invites stillness, the way your breath allows softness, the way the dark does not just conceal, but holds. These are not metaphors. They are affordances, real, available. Now you don't need more theory. You need more sensitivity to the grip of a railing, the pause of a silence, the look in someone's eyes. That might invite speech or stillness. And you, in turn, are not just a perceiver. You afford things too. Safety, tension, curiosity, grace. You are not a sealed observer. You are a surface the world touches, and a gesture it responds to. So tonight, you don't need to understand everything. Just let your fingers rest on the world and listen to what they feel invited to do, not to judge, not to solve, just to move, lightly, in alignment with the quiet calls of space. Affordances, they're everywhere, if you let yourself notice. Antifragility, you flinch, again. The world pushes, and part of you pulls back. It's instinct, a habit shaped by pain. But later, when the quiet returns, you realize something changed. You didn't break. You adjusted. You adapted. And strangely, you're stronger now. Not because the pain was good, not because suffering is noble, but because something in you learned how to bend, and in bending, to reshape itself. This is not resilience. This is something deeper. Antifragility, a concept born not in ancient metaphysics, but from the chaos of markets, the volatility of systems, the fragility of predictions. Nassim Nicholas Taleb gave the word to something many have felt, but few had named. We know what's fragile, things that break under pressure. We know what's robust, things that endure pressure unchanged. But what about the third kind? Systems, beings, ideas that improve when tested, that need volatility to thrive? That is antifragility, not surviving despite stress, but evolving because of it. It's the muscle that strengthens under weight, the immune system that trains itself through exposure, the mind that sharpens through contradiction. It is not invincibility. It is interaction with risk and learning from it. But here's the paradox. Anti-fragile things often look fragile. They fall, shift, wobble. They make mistakes. But that very chaos is how they learn. In contrast, systems that seem solid, rigid, flawless, over-engineered, often crack catastrophically when something unexpected hits. Think of the difference. A tree in the wind, roots deep, branches swaying, versus a perfectly straight steel pole, which snaps in the storm. Antifragility is not a trait. It's a design. It's an architecture of uncertainty. It embraces randomness, not out of recklessness, but from understanding that the world is not linear, not controlled, not clean. Taleb warns, the modern world tends to favor fragility. We build systems that look efficient, but are secretly brittle. We praise predictability, but are shocked when black swans appear. We overprotect and rob people of the exposure they need to grow. Children kept from risk never develop courage. Bodies without movement decay. Ideas never challenged grow lazy. So how do you become anti-fragile? By engaging with disorder, but strategically. By seeking optionality, having many small bets instead of one big dependency. By avoiding perfection and embracing trial, variation, and adaptation. By remembering, the crack is not always the beginning of the end. Sometimes it's the start of self-organization. You felt this before, a conversation that rattled your certainty and opened a new way of seeing, a loss that forced you to find something truer, a failure that burned but became the soil for something better. Anti-fragility is not about always winning. It is about designing yourself so that when you lose, you learn. So that disorder becomes information. So that pain becomes fuel. Tonight, you may reflect on what you've withstood, what almost broke you, what did break you, but left behind a different version, one more flexible, more awake. You're not unscarred, but the scars are part of the design, not decorations, not warnings, maps. And as the world continues to shift, to pressure, to twist, to unfold, you are invited not just to survive, but to build yourself to benefit from the storm, to let the wind carve you into something more agile, to let uncertainty remind you that rigidity is a trap, to find, in every tremor, the hidden signal of how to change. Antifragility is not a trait. It's a practice, a way of being in motion with a world that does not owe you safety, but offers you momentum. Let yourself move. Aporia. You've been thinking too long. Your thoughts have circled, folded, doubled back on themselves. And now, in the middle of the night, you sit in the stillness of the room, not with clarity, but with a kind of elegant confusion. You've reached a wall, or maybe the edge of something. But the strange thing is, you're not afraid. This is aporia, not doubt, not ignorance, but a precise kind of unknowing, a condition in which the problem doesn't just lack an answer, it seems to lack the possibility of resolution. Plato used aporia in his dialogues, moments where the conversation ends not with certainty, but with disorientation. Socrates, gentle and relentless, would question until the seams of a belief began to fray, and the interlocutor, often confident at first, would fall into silence. Not because they had failed, but because they had, for the first time, seen the depth of the question. In aporia, you meet the limits of thought, and those limits aren't walls, they are mirrors. They show you the shape of your assumptions. They show you where language frays, where logic buckles. You realize the problem is not out there. The problem is the way you've been asking. Derrida took this further. For him, aporia wasn't a dead end. It was an opening, a crack in the architecture of certainty, a site of potential, not because a truth was hidden behind the veil, but because the veil itself could now be seen. Aporia makes visible the structure of your thinking, its metaphors, its exclusions, its blind spots. It is, in a strange way, a kind of philosophical honesty, a refusal to pretend that everything has a name, a willingness to sit with the unsayable. And maybe you've been here before, you ask, what is justice? And every answer feels incomplete. You ask, what is love? And it slips through every sentence. You ask, who am I? And the answers multiply and cancel. Not because you are wrong, but because the questions are alive. Aporia is not paralysis. It is awakening. It's the moment when you stop grasping and start listening. When you stop demanding the world make sense on your terms. When you lean into uncertainty, not as failure, but as fidelity to the complexity of things. You don't exit aporia with answers. You carry it with you, like a scar, like a slow-burning lantern. And there's something almost sacred in that, to walk forward without a clear path, to speak without pretending to know, to think not to master, but to accompany. Tonight, in the soft breath of dark, you may feel it again, that subtle ache in the mind, that sensation of thinking without grip. And instead of resisting, you stay. You sit with the weight of unknowing. You let it settle into your spine. You let the silence say, this is part of thinking too. Not everything is meant to be resolved. Some questions are meant to be lived beside, not as riddles to solve, but as companions to walk with. Aporia teaches you that philosophy is not a ladder. It is a horizon, not a conclusion, but an opening, not an answer, but a kind of sacred confusion. And in that confusion, you are more awake than certainty ever allowed. Being toward death. There is a silence that comes at night, not from the absence of sound, but from the nearness of something unspeakable, a stillness that settles over the world when the distractions go to sleep. It whispers, sometimes, in the back of your thoughts, one day, none of this will be here. One day, you will not be here. Death is not something that happens only at the end. It is not an event that waits patiently behind a calendar date. It is not a moment, but a presence, a background hum beneath every decision, every heartbeat. It is the shadow that gives shape to the light. Heidegger did not see death as merely biological. It was not just the final breath or the flat line. For him, death was existential. It was the possibility that defines all possibilities, the one certainty in a sea of ambiguity. And in facing it, not denying it, you begin to exist authentically. Most of the time, we live in evasion. We numb ourselves with tasks, with plans, with entertainment, with shallow chatter. We bury death under to-do lists and small talk. We treat it as something that happens to others. Even when it brushes against our lives, we flinch and look away, trying to return to the illusion of continuity. But to be human is to know you are finite, not just intellectually, but viscerally. To feel that your time is not a resource, but a fuse. And when you let that truth in, not as a morbid thought, but as a structuring awareness, it transforms everything. You begin to ask different questions. Not, what should I do today? But what matters if I do not have forever? Not, what do they think of me? But, what would I think if this were my last day alive? Not, how do I fit in? But what will I regret when there's no time left to pretend? Being toward death is not about despair. It is not about waiting passively or dreading the end. It is about turning toward it, gazing into the abyss and finding not nothingness, but clarity. In the face of death, the trivial burns away. The urgent becomes irrelevant. What remains is the real. There is something strangely liberating in that. The freedom to drop the performance, the courage to speak plainly, the clarity to love more fiercely, not because love is eternal, but precisely because it is not. To be authentically alive is to walk with death beside you, not behind, not ahead, but beside. It does not rob meaning, it gives it. It reminds you that your time is a question mark, and every day is a fragile answer. And so, you begin to live not with panic, but with presence. You no longer sleepwalk through routines. You look your life in the face and ask, is this mine? Did I choose this? Or did I inherit it like a script I never questioned? Death does not wait, but it does allow. It allows you, if you choose, to awaken before the curtain falls, to create instead of consume, to say what matters, to leave something behind, not in stone, perhaps, but in memory, in kindness, in truth. One day, the last breath will come. You will not be there to observe it. But until then, every breath is a chance to live not away from death, but toward it, with eyes open, heart exposed, and soul unarmored. Because only what can end truly matters. Dasein. You are here, not just physically, but in a way deeper than location. The air wraps around your skin. Time drips forward. And somewhere behind your eyes, there is a flicker of awareness. Not of anything in particular, just of being. This is Dasein. Not a soul, not a self, not a creature with a name, but a kind of presence, a mode of existence that knows it exists. Martin Heidegger didn't invent the word. It simply means being there in German. But he filled it with gravity, with risk, with openness. Dasein is not just a person. It is the kind of being that asks what being is. You, not because you think, but because you care that you are. You do not simply occupy the world like a stone or a tree. You are thrown into it, not by choice, not into a clean room. You wake into a situation already unfolding, a body, a culture, a time, a web of meanings. And you are always already in that world, not observing from outside, but entangled, rooted, moved. You do not exist next to a world. You exist as a being in the world. This is Dasein. But with this presence comes something heavier, because Dasein is not eternal. It is finite. It carries within it the silent awareness of its end. You are aware, in some quiet corridor of your being, that you will die. And this awareness is not abstract. It shapes everything. It gives urgency to choice, weight to time, tension to freedom. Without death, there is no true presence, because presence only matters when it can be lost. Dasein does not live as a fixed object. It lives as possibility. It is always ahead of itself, always projecting, anticipating, becoming. You are not static. You are a site of unfolding. And yet, most of the time, you forget this. You sink into Das Man, the they, the default mode, the anonymous crowd. You say what people say, do what people do, think what is already thought. You become inauthentic, not false, but unawake. But sometimes, something cracks. A loss, a silence, a moment when the world no longer explains itself. And suddenly, the veil slips. You feel thrown again. You feel the question of being, not as philosophy, but as trembling. What does it mean to be here? Not as a role, not as a name, but simply to exist. Dasein is not a theory. It is a tension between comfort and awareness, between forgetting and remembering, between covering up being and standing in its rawness. You cannot hold it all the time, but you can return to breath, to time, to this, now, here. Not as an idea, but as presence. Tonight, you are not just someone in a room. You are a point of disclosure. The world shows itself through you. And you, finite, fragile, luminous, are the site where being comes to light. That is Dasein. And that is enough. Difference and repetition. You hear the ticking of a clock in the dark. Each tick seems the same. But somehow, it's not. You feel it, not in the sound, but in the silence between. Something changes, slightly, secretly. You can't name it, but it's there. Difference hiding beneath repetition. We are taught to think through identity, that A is A, that the tree is the tree, the word is the word. We're taught that repetition confirms, it reinforces, it makes stable. But Deleuze asks, what if repetition is not sameness, but difference becoming visible over time? What if each moment that seems identical is in fact a mutation? What if behind the copy, the face, the gesture, the name, there's always a trembling, a divergence, a deviation that escapes recognition? To think through difference is to stop flattening things into categories. It is to stop believing that every new event is merely an echo of the old. It is to notice the crack, the shimmer, the distortion, and to follow it. Deleuze doesn't give you a system. He gives you motion. He speaks of thought not as a structure, but as a pulse. Concepts do not rest in definitions. They fold, stretch, explode. Every idea is already becoming another. Every repetition is an act of creation. You experience this every day, but you rarely name it. You wake up in the same bed, but the dream still lingers from the night before. You say hello to someone you love, but today it carries weight. It didn't yesterday. You hear the same song, but it wounds you now where it used to heal. This is not illusion. It's not instability. It's life asserting its excess. It is the refusal of the world to stay still, even when disguised in habit. Deleuze tells us that true repetition is difference in disguise. The world does not loop, it spirals. To repeat something authentically is not to copy it. It is to allow it to differ through time. And to think, truly think, is not to match what is known, but to disturb it, to allow thought itself to vibrate with difference. This is not an easy path. It resists clarity. It rejects fixed categories. You may feel lost, ungrounded. You may ask, if nothing repeats identically, how do I hold on to meaning? But meaning was never fixed. It was always trembling. You just didn't look long enough. In your own life, this plays out in the patterns you struggle to break. The mistakes that return, almost the same, but never quite. The conversations you replay in your mind, differently each time. The selves you have been, scattered across time, who look similar from afar, but dissolve up close. You are not one. You are difference repeating itself. A process, not a product. An unfolding. And in the quiet of the night, when all seems still, you may notice the pulse of becoming again. That your thoughts today are not the same as yesterday's, even if they wear the same clothes. That your pain has shifted its shape. That your longing has found a new texture. That nothing in you is still, not even now. This is not a tragedy. It is the opening of the real. To live in difference is to refuse the comfort of false stability. To honor the unrepeatable even in what looks identical. To see time not as return, but as creation, again and again and again. So breathe now, in this moment. Not the same breath as before. Let it differ. Let it repeat. Eternal return. What if this moment, this exact one, has happened before? The way your hand rests, the rhythm of your breath, the way the darkness pools in the corners of your room. What if all of it has already been, and not just once, not metaphorically, but infinitely? This is the idea of eternal return, Nietzsche's most haunting challenge. Not a belief, not a law, but a thought experiment, a test of the weight you assign to life. Imagine a demon, Nietzsche says, whispering to you in your loneliest hour. This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will live once more, and countless times more, and there will be nothing new in it, not even a single pain. Every sigh, every breath, every gesture, all of it will return. Would you fall to the floor and gnash your teeth? Or would you say, yes, again? The eternal return is not about physics or cosmology. It's about how you live. It asks, would you choose this life again? Not in fantasy, not with edits, exactly as it is. Every mistake, every hesitation, every hour wasted, every joy you didn't know how to hold, all of it, on loop, forever. This is not about punishment. It is about evaluation. If the thought of eternal return fills you with dread, perhaps it is not the idea that is unbearable. Perhaps it is the life you are living. The weight of this concept is almost too much to carry. But Nietzsche doesn't want to crush you. He wants to awaken you. Because if you knew that each moment would echo into infinity, you might begin to live differently. You might begin to say yes more carefully. You might begin to say no more bravely. You might begin to shape your hours as if they were not disposable. And here's the deeper twist. Even if eternal return is not real, the possibility of it forces you to ask, what if how I live matters? Not because of consequence, but because of recurrence. What if meaning is not found in escape, but in affirmation? Not in transcending life, but in embracing it. All of it, even the suffering, especially the suffering. Because the eternal return is not sentimental. It does not let you edit out the ugly. It does not ask you to romanticize pain. It asks you to transform it, to own it so deeply that even your regrets become sacred. Tonight, in the stillness, you might feel the strangeness of this thought wrapping around you, that this version of you, right now, might return again and again, like a wave folding back into the ocean of time. And you, alone with your thoughts, are the only one who can answer. Would I live this life again? If not, what must change? What must be risked? What must be let go? What must be loved more fiercely, more consciously, more fully? Eternal return does not offer comfort. It offers challenge. The challenge to live as if each breath were not a passing moment, but a declaration. A yes to life. Not because it is perfect, but because it is yours. Because in the face of repetition, the only rebellion is joy, not happiness, but joy, deep, knowing, cracked open joy. So tonight, the wheel turns once more, and perhaps, just perhaps, you will whisper back, yes, again. Event ontology. You live most days on the surface. Things seem stable. Names stay the same. Roles repeat. The world unfolds in patterns that almost feel predetermined. But sometimes, without warning, something breaks through. A moment that wasn't supposed to happen. A cut in the fabric. A silence that screams. An event. Not just a happening. Not just something that occurs. An event, in a Lambadieu sense, is a rupture in being. It is not part of the world. It alters the world. It does not fit into the order. It redefines the order. You don't recognize an event the moment it arrives. You feel its tremor first. Like waking up mid-sentence in a dream you didn't choose. Time tilts. Meaning staggers. And you stand on the edge of something that wasn't there before and now is. Badiou does not see being as a thing, not as substance, not as permanence. Being is multiplicity. Being is structure. And the event is that which escapes the structure, an exception that refuses to be counted. You are born into systems, language, law, identity. They tell you what is possible. They carve the horizon. But the event says, what is not all that could be. A revolution, a love, a scientific breakthrough, a poem that burns through the noise. These are not additions to the world. They are refoundations, not progress, but rebeginning. To live truthfully for Badiou is not to obey structures, but to remain faithful to the event once it appears. And this is not easy, because after the rupture, the world will try to cover it, to assimilate it, to digest it back into sameness. You'll be told it was a phase, a coincidence, a symptom, a distraction. But if you felt it, truly felt it, you carry its echo. Faith, in this sense, is not religious. It is existential. It is the fidelity to what transformed you, even when everything returns to normal. You've lived such moments, even if you didn't name them. The conversation that changed your trajectory. The night that split your sense of self. The gesture you didn't expect. That rearranged your understanding of love. They do not make sense immediately. They are not logical. They are interventions. And perhaps tonight, in the quiet between breaths, you can ask, what event has marked me? What fracture do I remain faithful to? What moment in my life refuses to disappear because it never truly belonged to the world before it? The event does not belong to history. It creates it. It is not just remembered. It demands a response. to reorganize your sense of what is, to act differently, to see anew, to stand in the aftermath and say, something happened, and I cannot return. And maybe, not tonight, not yet, but someday, you will become an event for someone else, not as noise, but as rupture, as the thing that could not be predicted and now cannot be undone. You are not merely a person. You are a site where the impossible might occur. And perhaps, even now, beneath the silence, it already has. Hyperstition. You hear the story once, a strange one. Maybe it's a joke, maybe a rumor, maybe something you read online late at night, in the quiet tension before sleep. It sticks. You mention it. Someone else repeats it. Then, one day, it feels true. Not because it always was, but because we acted like it was. This is hyperstition, a term coined by cybernetic philosophers and technomystics, taken up by the CCRU, Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, Nick Land, and later Mark Fisher. Not a superstition, not a prediction, but something stranger, a fiction that makes itself real. Hyperstition doesn't wait to be validated. It writes itself into the world, not through logic, but through belief, repetition, code, desire. It is the meme that becomes a movement, the prophecy that shapes the behavior that fulfills it, the conspiracy theory that pulls reality into its orbit. It is not about truth. It is about circulation. Hyperstitions are agents. They don't describe the world. They infect it. A new ideology, a digital god, a market trend, a self-fulfilling crisis. All can begin as hyperstitions. You felt this. A fear spreads, and people act on it. And that action brings about the very danger they feared. A myth forms around a technology, and developers begin to shape the tech to fit the myth. A future is imagined, and by being imagined, begins to pull events toward itself. The future, in hyperstition, is not ahead. It is under construction, by ideas that behave like viruses, like ghosts with keyboards. It blurs the boundary between story and system. It says, if enough minds host the idea begins to act. The world is not passively real. It is mutable, rewritten by feedback loops between language, affect, code, and matter. Hyperstition is not safe. It can birth monsters. It has no morality. It doesn't ask whether it should, only whether it spreads. Techno-capital itself may be a hyperstition, the belief in endless growth, optimization, transcendence. The imagined AI god that people are building into being. But it works both ways. Resistance can be hyperstitional too. A myth of collective uprising. A new ethic. A story told not because it's proven, but because it must be made true. To speak of future is to make the present tremble. And maybe tonight you wonder, what hyperstitions do I already carry? The idea of success that shapes your behavior. The fear of failure that keeps you compliant. The story of who you are. That repeats itself not because it's accurate, but because you keep performing it. You are not outside this. You are a host. You pass on concepts. You make futures contagious. And if that's the case, then you are also a node of resistance. A writer of counterfictions. A shaper of the next strange loop. Hyperstition is not just a theory. It is a mode of activation. A realization that the boundary between fiction and ontology is thin, and that the world responds to language not as truth, but as force. So speak carefully. Imagine dangerously. And when you dream, dream as if the world is listening. Because it might be. Metaxy. You're not in the dark, not quite. But the light hasn't arrived either. You exist in between. Not fallen, not risen, suspended, in tension, in motion, in awareness. This is Metaxy, the middle ground, the threshold, the space where the human being resides, not as a mistake, but as a condition. Plato first named it. In his dialogues, he speaks of love, eros, as a diamond that dwells between gods and mortals, between knowing and not knowing, between perfection and decay. Metaxy is the space in which eros moves. You are not divine. You are not brute matter. You are in between. And that in between is not a flaw. It is the site of longing, of growth, of struggle. It is where philosophy happens. Eric Vogelin, centuries later, picked up the thread. For him, Metaxy was not just a concept. It was the structure of consciousness. Human experience is not rooted in certainties, but in tensions, between time and eternity, between immanence and transcendence, between order and chaos. You are not one or the other. You are the place where they meet. And this meeting is not comfortable. You feel it in your contradictions. You want love, but you fear vulnerability. You seek meaning, but distrust belief. You crave the infinite, but collapse under its weight. You are torn, always reaching, never arriving. But Metaxy says, this reaching is what makes you human. You are the bridge, not the destination. And maybe that's enough. The danger is forgetting where you stand, falling into false clarity, clinging to certainty, pretending you are whole, when wholeness was never the point. Modern life often pulls you from the middle. It pushes binary choices, forces resolution, demands sides. But real life, real thought, happens in the liminal. You are not this or that. You are this and not this, simultaneously lacking and overflowing. Metaxy is where mystery lives, not as a riddle to solve, but as a rhythm to walk with. It's the space of hesitation, of breath before speech, of silence before the name. And tonight, maybe, you feel it. You are not who you were, but not yet who you will be. You are tired, but not ready to sleep. You believe, but with cracks. You stand between. And Metaxy whispers, that is not failure. That is home. This middle is fertile. Here you encounter the other. Here you listen without conclusion. Here you pray, even if you don't know to whom. Plato's cave, the shadows and the light, is not a journey from lie to truth. It is a space of transition. And in that transition, in the climb, is where the soul awakens. You are not meant to stay in the cave, but you are not meant to live in the sun either. You are the one who turns, who reaches toward the light, but whose feet still touch the stone. So tonight, do not rush to resolve. Stay here, in the Metaxy, in the ache of becoming, in the glow between silence and speech, in the space between doubt and trust. Let it hold you, not as a question, but as a presence. You are not alone. You are among those who dwell in the middle. And in that middle, something infinite begins to breathe through you. Negative dialectics. You lie awake in the dark. The room holds its shape, but your thoughts refuse to settle. Each time you try to grasp one fully, it folds into another, like smoke curling away from your fingers. Nothing resolves. Nothing clicks. And somewhere in that quiet discomfort, you begin to wonder. Maybe this is the truth, not in certainty, but in fracture. Theodor Adorno did not believe in synthesis. He distrusted conclusions. He saw in them the seeds of domination, the violence of simplification. Where others sought unity, he looked for dissonance, for what refused to be contained. Negative dialectics is not a method with a goal. It is not a tool to arrive at truth, but a way of resisting falsehood. It does not build systems. It tears holes in them. At its core is this: the thing is not identical with the concept. Reality always exceeds the name we give it. And yet, philosophy too often pretends otherwise, treating ideas as closed loops, identities as fixed, categories as sufficient. Adorno wanted none of that. He wanted thought to tremble. He stood in the ruins of the 20th century, Auschwitz, bureaucracy, rational planning systems that led to slaughter. And he asked, what kind of reason does this? What kind of logic marches men into death while quoting the Enlightenment? He concluded that thinking itself must change. We must not smooth contradictions. We must not resolve oppositions into comfort. We must stay in the tension, in the wound, in the refusal to let meaning congeal. To think dialectically, but negatively, is to let objects speak in their brokenness, to allow non-identity to persist, to understand that each is carries with it a not quite, and that the most honest sentence ends with an ellipsis. You may feel this in yourself, in the way you shift between roles, the way no label fits, the way your beliefs contradict your actions, your desires conflict with your values. You are not a coherent unit. You are a collage of interruptions. And yet, you are told to be whole, to be clear, to choose, to reconcile. Negative dialectics tells you, don't fake resolution. Don't pretend your wounds are healed. Don't name what resists naming. Instead, listen to the discord. Let the unfinished speak. Let silence sit beside you without rushing to fill it. This kind of thinking is slow, heavy, sometimes lonely. It does not sell well. It cannot be packaged. But it is one of the few forms of thought that does not betray what it observes. It is, in a way, a kind of mourning for lost wholes, for impossible syntheses, but also a kind of love for the damaged, the partial, the opaque. Tonight, as your mind drifts, you might notice the fragments, the conversations that don't resolve, the faces you can't quite remember, the feelings with no name. These are not failures. They are traces, and in those traces, there is a strange clarity, not the clarity of light, but the clarity of shadow, not the sharpness of answers, but the shape of questions that linger. You are not finished. You are not final. And that is not a flaw. That is your resistance to being flattened. To think negatively is to honor what cannot be summed up, to let contradiction breathe, to let the mind not settle. And maybe, as sleep begins to pull you downward, you will carry with you not a truth, but a question that won't quite let go. Philosophy of the Fragment. You sit in the dark and try to gather yourself, but only pieces come. A sentence you once heard, a face you forgot you remembered, the feeling of walking alone in early morning rain. Nothing complete, nothing whole, just fragments. And maybe that's all there is. Not broken things, but things that were never whole to begin with. The fragment is not a failure. It is a form, a philosophy, a stance against the tyranny of the complete. Walter Benjamin knew this. He walked through libraries and ruins, arcades and archives, not to systematize, but to collect, to let ideas stand not as monuments, but as shards. The fragment is honest. It admits, this is only a part. This is only a glimpse. This is all I can give you. In a world obsessed with narratives, with closure, with the full picture, the fragment resists. It says, truth is not always continuous. It says, sometimes, to speak clearly, is to lie. Because what you live is not a system. Your life is notes scrawled in margins, moments cut off mid-sentence, conversations that didn't resolve, dreams that left no image behind. You do not arrive as a thesis. You arrive as a texture, interrupted, nonlinear, unfinished. Benjamin's writing reflects this. His greatest work, the Arcades Project, was never completed. It was a constellation of citations, thoughts, sparks. He believed meaning arises not from flow, but from juxtaposition. Place two fragments beside each other, and a third space opens, like memory, like collage, like walking through a city of ghosts. The fragment leaves space for silence, for what cannot be said, for what resists being contained. It is a response to the violence of totality, to the urge to dominate meaning, to flatten experience into categories. When you think in fragments, you are not confused. You are faithful to the way the world actually arrives, bit by bit, flash by flash, one incomplete insight at a time. Even your pain arrives this way, not as theory, but as images, the empty chair, the name you don't say, the sound of a door closing too softly, and your joy too, the way someone's hand found yours, the way light once moved across a wall, the way one sentence from a book rearranged your breathing. None of it builds a system, but it builds you. You are a collection of fragments. You are not broken. You are composed. Philosophy of the fragment does not seek to fix you. It asks only this: what happens when you stop trying to be seamless? What if you spoke like a notebook? What if you lived like an archive? What if your truth didn't need to be a statue, but could be a pile of stones rearranged with every step? Tonight, in the stillness, you may feel the urge to explain yourself, to gather your experiences into a neat thread, to say, this is who I am. But maybe, just for now, you can say, this is what I remember. This is what I noticed. This is what remains. Fragments. And in them, something deeper than order, intimacy, texture, presence. You are not the whole. You are the glow between the pieces. And that is enough. Speculative realism. You look at the world and think, this is how it is. Trees grow, stones fall, fire burns. You see, and therefore it is. But late at night, in the soft decay of certainty, you begin to wonder, what is the world without you in it? What does the stone mean without your gaze? Does it even need to mean? Philosophy has long had a hidden bias, one so deep it goes unnoticed. Correlationism, the belief that we can never think of being without thinking of it as it appears to us. That all reality is tied somehow to human access, to thought, to sensation, to you. But what if reality does not care about your categories? What if the stone does not wait to be seen? What if the world is not a stage, and you, not the audience, but a minor ripple on the edge of the set? Speculative realism emerged as a revolt, a philosophical rebellion against the quiet assumption that meaning must always pass through us. Graham Harman, Quentin Melissu, Ray Brassier, and others, names scattered like signals through the dark, began to ask, what if we take the world seriously on its own terms? Not as object for subject, not as phenomena for consciousness, but as radical exteriority? They do not agree on methods. Some turn to objects themselves, their withdrawn depths. Some turn to mathematics, contingency, extinction. But they share a commitment to thinking beyond the human filter. You feel this in subtle ways. When you stare into the night sky and realize the stars burned out before your ancestors were born. When you consider the geology beneath your feet, a silent, slow time that makes your heartbeat seem like sparks. when you dream of machines dreaming of machines, and realize your thoughts may not be the center of thought itself. Speculative realism says, the world is not waiting to be interpreted. It exists, full, heavy, indifferent, not hostile, but utterly alien. It is not there for you. And this, far from being nihilistic, is strangely liberating. It means that meaning is not fragile, that existence does not tremble at your absence, that truth is wider than your vision. But it also asks something difficult, to release the need to ground every question in experience, to abandon the comfort of, what does it mean to me, to think, even for a moment, as if you were not the axis of the world. What does the glacier think? What does the black hole know? What is the ontology of dust? Not metaphors, not poetic devices, but real questions, brutal, luminous, disorienting. The task is not to humanize things. It is to let things be strange again. Speculative realism invites you into an unfamiliar silence, a silence where your concepts might fail, where your language stutters, where thought must stretch into shapes it never used before. And in that stretching, something happens, not mastery, but humility. You are not the first observer. You are not the final interpreter. You are a brief appearance in a vast choreography, and the dance continues whether you applaud or not. Tonight, as the sky thickens above you, you may feel it, that the world is not a mirror. It is an abyss of presence, a fire without a story, a wind without a meaning, a planet that spins, with or without you. And perhaps that is not loneliness, but a different kind of intimacy. A chance to meet things as they are, not as you need them to be. Subjective idealism. You close your eyes and the room disappears. Not just visually, but in presence. The chair, the desk, the walls, they vanish into unthought shadows. You wonder, are they still there, or have they gone silent in your absence? Would they exist if no mind were left to perceive them? This is not a trick of attention. It is a door into something stranger. Something George Berkeley once whispered into the fabric of philosophy. Esse est percipi. To be is to be perceived. According to Berkeley, there is no matter as we commonly believe. There are only ideas and the minds that perceive them. You have never touched a chair. You have experienced the idea of a chair, the pressure, the shape, the concept, inside your mind. You have never seen a tree. You've only ever seen a perception of a tree, shaped by your senses, structured by your memory, soaked in subjectivity. So what, then, is the world without a perceiver? Berkeley's answer, it is nothing, no perception, no existence. But before the abyss opens too wide, he offers a stabilizing hand. God, a divine mind that perceives all things, always, holding the world in constant awareness. The tree still falls in the forest, not because you hear it, but because God does. But even if you step beyond theology, the question lingers. If everything you know is filtered through perception, how can you ever touch anything truly outside of you? Your mind lives inside its own palace of mirrors. Every sound you hear is vibrations interpreted by your biology. Every color is your brain's response to light waves. You do not see the world. You generate a world from sensory patterns. And yet, you feel so certain. You move through space with confidence. You assume continuity. You believe in objects, in others, in causes. But the cracks appear, don't they? You misremember. You mishear. You reach for something in a dream and wake with your hand still outstretched. You experience a room filled with people and feel alone, or sit in solitude and feel watched. Where, then, is reality? Subjective idealism does not deny the world. It denies that the world can ever exist apart from mind. It asks you to reconsider what real means, when all that ever arrives at you is filtered, constructed, interpreted. Are you touching the world, or are you touching your interpretation of it? And if so, where is the line between dream and waking? Berkeley was not trying to induce vertigo. He was trying to rescue meaning. In a world made of perception, the mind becomes sacred. The world is not dead matter. It is alive, relational, woven through attention. Even this moment, you, here, listening, thinking, is not in the world. It is the world as it arrives to you. And when you sleep, what remains? Do objects wait in darkness? Or are they folded up, quiet, in your absence? Tonight, the room surrounds you, but what you feel is your version of the room, its temperature, its weight, the memory of its angles. You cannot escape perception, but you can become aware of its contours. You can begin to wonder. Not, is this real? But, what is reality if it depends on me to exist? You are not an observer in a world of things. You are a mind surrounded by mind. Perception on perception. Thought nested in thought. You are not alone in a material expanse. You are part of a conversation, a field of mutual reflection, a shared imagining. And perhaps that is not a prison, but a form of freedom. To know that everything you touch is also touching you. That the world is not behind glass, it is inside the act of looking. And so tonight, as your thoughts dissolve into dreams, you can ask yourself one final question. Who dreams the world into being when you forget it exists? The absurd hero. At the bottom of the hill, he stands still for a moment. His hands raw, his breath shallow, the stone at his feet again. It has rolled down, as it always does. And he, as he always will, begins again. This is not a punishment. Not anymore. It is a rhythm, a heartbeat. The absurd hero does not curse the gods. He no longer looks for rescue or escape. He has stopped asking the question, why? And started answering with motion. Albert Camus knew what many try to forget, that life does not explain itself. The universe is not a storybook. It offers no moral, no hidden plan, no grand finale. It is a vast, unblinking silence. And into that silence, we shout our questions, and hear only the echo of our own voices. That is the absurd, the collision between our hunger for meaning and the indifference of the world, a demand with no answer, a plea into the void. Some recoil, some deny, some build systems of comfort, gods, futures, promises of justice. But Camus asks us not to look away, to face the absurd without flinching, not with despair, but with revolt. The absurd hero is not a cynic. He is not numb. He feels the futility of the climb, and still climbs. He sees the emptiness, and still chooses love. He knows that death is coming, and still laughs under the sun. His strength is not hope. It is clarity. He does not wait for the universe to offer meaning. He brings his own. He paints the blank canvas not because it will last, but because he is here and he can. And that is enough. There is something deeply human in this defiance. Not the scream of anger, but the quiet nod of one who understands and proceeds anyway. To live without illusions and still choose joy, that is his rebellion. And joy, in this context, is not shallow. It is not distraction. It is the fierce, conscious affirmation of life, even when it burns. It is dancing in the dark, not because there is light ahead, but because you are alive now, and your feet still move. To imagine Sisyphus happy is not naive. It is revolutionary. It is a refusal to be broken by the truth. It is the discovery that the climb itself can be sacred, even if the summit disappears each time. You are not Sisyphus, but you carry your own boulders. You roll them each day, through work, through loss, through the unremarkable repetitions of living. And like him, you must ask, will I do this with bitterness or with fire? Meaning is not found. It is made in your hands, in your gaze, in the way you choose to lift the stone again, knowing full well it will fall, and lifting it anyway. The banality of evil. You imagine evil as something loud, violent, dramatic. You imagine sharp teeth, red flags, broken glass, raised voices. But late at night, when everything is quiet, you might realize real evil is quieter, almost silent. A tick of a clock, a checkbox on a form, a shrug. Hannah Arendt sat in a courtroom in Jerusalem, watching a man on trial for orchestrating logistics behind one of history's most devastating genocides. She expected a monster. What she saw instead was a clerk, a man in a suit, polite, organized, insisting he was just following orders. She did not see diabolical rage. She saw something much colder, emptiness. The phrase she gave us, the banality of evil, wasn't meant to excuse, but to expose. That evil, in its most terrifying form, doesn't always arrive with fire. Sometimes it walks in quietly, bearing a clipboard, speaking in the passive voice. It doesn't say, I decided. It says, I had to. I was told. It's not my responsibility. It's just how things work. And so a man signs a paper. A woman files a report. A supervisor forwards an email. A citizen looks away. And the machinery continues. You want to believe you'd be different. That in a time of darkness, you would resist. You'd speak out. Hide the hunted. Raise your voice. But the truth Arendt revealed is more unsettling. You are not tested in the dramatic moments. You are tested in the small ones, the ordinary ones. You are tested when saying nothing is easier, when pressing accept is faster, when doing the right thing feels awkward, when evil is disguised as policy, as protocol, as just the way things are. Because banal evil is not committed by villains. It is committed by functionaries, people who stop thinking, who replace moral judgment with efficiency, who perform obedience so automatically that they forget they have a choice. Arendt called it thoughtlessness, a kind of moral sleepwalking. Not ignorance, something more dangerous, indifference wrapped in professionalism. You might feel this in yourself, the times you avoid eye contact, the times you repeat someone else's line even when it doesn't feel right, the times you nod, knowing it's not true because it's easier than conflict. And these moments pile up. No single one damns you, but together they shape a life, and many such lives shape history. The banality of evil teaches us that systems don't need hatred to function. They just need compliance. They just need people willing to go with the flow, even when the flow leads into darkness. And yet, Arendt also believed in resistance, not through heroism, but through thinking deeply, uncomfortably, persistently. She saw thought not as abstraction, but as responsibility. To pause, to ask, what am I doing? To remember that behind every number is a face, behind every file is a story, behind every silence is a choice. You are never just doing your job. You are always shaping the world through your actions, or inactions. And maybe tonight, as you lie still in your bed, this idea disturbs you. Maybe you recall moments where you followed the script, moments when you let the moment pass, moments when you heard the wrong thing and said nothing. That discomfort is not guilt. It is awareness. It is the beginning of thinking. You are not outside history. You are not neutral. You are not safe from complicity. None of us are. But if evil can be banal, then so can good. It can be a refusal to laugh at the cruel joke. A question asked in a quiet meeting. A door left open. A file delayed. A moment of thought where there should have been only repetition. Evil does not need monsters. It needs silence. But tonight, there is no silence in you. There is a question. And maybe that's where resistance begins. The Barber Paradox. Who shaves the man who shaves everyone? There is a town, a quiet town, with quiet rules. In this town, there is a barber, and the barber follows one simple rule. He shaves all the men in the town who do not shave themselves, and only them. That's it. He does not shave men who shave themselves. He only shaves those who don't. The town runs smoothly. Everyone knows the rule. It's clean, logical. Until one question is asked, who shaves the barber? And everything falls apart. Logic tied in a knot. Let's walk through it. If the barber does not shave himself, then by the rule, he must, because he shaves all those who don't. But if he does shave himself, then he's shaving someone who shaves himself, which he's not allowed to do. Either way, the rule is broken. The definition undoes itself. It's a loop, a contradiction, a paradox. Russell's trap. The Barber Paradox was introduced by Bertrand Russell in the early 20th century. But it isn't really about barbers. It's about sets and definitions that refer to themselves. Russell used it to point out a problem in the foundations of mathematics. Imagine the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does that set include itself? If it does, then it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then it should. The same loop, the same paradox, a clean rule that implodes under its own logic. Why it matters. We build systems to make things make sense. Mathematics, language, law, programming, thought. But sometimes, a system contains the seed of its own failure, a definition that turns inward and devours itself. The barber is a mirror. He shows that rules can become unstable when they try to include themselves, and that some truths cannot be neatly categorized. They wobble, they resist, they unravel. Living the paradox, you felt this too. You say, I don't take advice from people who give advice. Or, I don't believe anyone who says they're honest. Or you try to trust your mind, using your mind. You become the barber, trapped in a rule that catches itself. And the more you try to follow it, the more it pulls you apart. Escaping the loop. Russell's solution was to create types, to separate levels of logic, to say, some statements can't refer to themselves. In daily life, the escape is simpler. Recognize the loop. Step outside it. Sometimes, you must stop shaving definitions with absolute razors. Sometimes, you just let the barber grow a beard. The Omelas Problem. The cost of a perfect world. Imagine a city. Omelas. It is bright, joyful, free. The sun never offends. The laughter is honest. The people are wise, gentle, and full of life. There is no war, no poverty, no cruelty. Music flows through its streets. Children dance in the dust. The air smells of sweetness and light. It is, in every way, a paradise. But there is a door, and behind it, a child. The secret of Omelas in a basement, dark and locked. A single child sits in filth, alone, starving, confused. The child is never touched, never comforted, never released. And everyone in Omelas knows. At some point in their life, each citizen is told. They are shown the child. They see its misery. They hear its whimpers. And then they're told, the happiness of Omelas depends on this child's suffering. If the child is freed, the city will fall. The joy will vanish. The beauty will rot. Most stay. Most turn away. They cry, they struggle, they rage. Then they return to the sun, to the laughter, to the light. They justify. They say, it's only one. They would not understand freedom. They were born for this. They walk the streets again, quietly complicit, because who would destroy paradise for a single life? But some leave. They see the child. They cannot forget. And one day, without drama, without protest, they walk away, out of the gates, into the unknown, beyond the city, alone. No one stops them. No one knows where they go. But they choose to walk, because they cannot stay in a world built on someone else's pain. What is this problem? The Omelas problem is not fiction. It is a mirror. It asks, how much suffering are you willing to ignore so that you may be happy? What is your phone made of? Who stitched your clothes? Whose hunger made your dinner cheap? We live in cities, bright and free, built on the backs of invisible children. We look away, and then look again. Is it worth it? What does it mean to live a good life in a world where others suffer for your ease? Can a paradise be just if it rests on injustice? Is one child too many, or a necessary cost in a flawed reality? And if you knew, if you truly knew, what pain bought your peace, would you still stay? The choice. There is no villain in Omelas, no tyrant, no war, only the terms, joy for suffering, and the freedom to accept or reject. There are no guards, no locks on the city gates, only the question, can you live with this? So tonight, as your comforts settle around you, and the day softens into sleep, ask yourself, who is the child beneath your world? What price has been paid for your ease? And if you found the door, would you open it? And once you saw inside, would you stay? The Teletransportation Paradox. You step into a machine. It scans your body, every atom, every neuron, every memory. It records you perfectly. Then it destroys your body, cleanly, instantly, painlessly. On the other side of the planet, another machine receives the data. It builds you back, molecule by molecule, cell by cell. A new body, identical, with your memories, your voice, your laugh, your pain. You open your eyes. You step out. You say, it worked. But did it? Who is standing there? Is the person who exits the machine you? They remember your childhood. They love the same people. They finish your sentences. They think they are you. But are they? Or are they just a copy, built from data, stitched together from memory, standing on the grave of the original? If someone builds a perfect replica of a book, is it still the same book? If someone builds a perfect replica of you, is it still you? Or is you already gone? The paradox. The Teletransportation Paradox was made famous by philosopher Derek Parfit. He asked, what makes you you? Is it your body? But that changes constantly. Is it your memory? But memories can fade, twist, or be implanted. Is it your soul? Then where is it? Can it be copied? Or does it vanish when the original body dies? If identity is based on continuity, and teleportation breaks that continuity, then who exactly wakes up on the other side? A fork in the machine. Now imagine this. The machine malfunctions. It scans you, sends the data, rebuilds you on the other side, but fails to destroy the original. Now there are two of you, same memories, same feelings, same claim. I'm the real one. So which one is you? Can two of you be you? Or does identity split? What does it mean to survive? If teleportation feels like death, would you still step in? Would you enter, knowing that you would end, but a perfect version would continue? What does it mean to survive? Is it to feel continuous, or to remain physically intact, or to have your pattern preserved? What matters more, who you are or what comes after you? The mirror of identity. The paradox is not just science fiction. It's a mirror, because your body is already replacing itself. Your cells regenerate. Your thoughts shift. You forget things. You reinvent yourself. You are already teleporting in slow motion. And yet, you feel continuous. You feel like oneself. But is that continuity real, or just an illusion that helps you sleep? The Sorites Paradox. Imagine a single grain of sand. Tiny. Barely there. Not a heap. Clearly not. Now place another grain beside it. Still not a heap. Then another. And another. 100. 200. 300. At some point, you stop counting and start calling it something new. A heap. But where was the line? Where exactly did the grains become the heap? That's the Sorites Paradox, step by step into uncertainty. Sorites comes from the Greek word soros, meaning heap. It's a paradox of vague predicates. It asks, if one grain of sand is not a heap, and adding one grain can't turn a non-heap into a heap, then even 1,000,000 grains should still not be a heap. Because at no point does a single grain seem to cause the transformation. But we know this can't be right. 1,000,000 grains is obviously a heap. One grain is obviously not. And yet, if each step seems harmless, how do we ever cross from not to is? Where is the moment of change? Where does identity begin? Where does it end? Not just sand. The paradox goes beyond deserts. When does a person become bald? When you remove one hair? Or 10? Or 1,000? When does a pile of clothes become a mess? When does night begin? When does youth end? These are not just semantic games. They're questions about how we draw boundaries in a world that flows. We live in gradients, but we think in categories. And that mismatch creates paradox. Why it hurts the brain? You might say, a heap is just whatever we decide it is. But if it's only a decision, then there's no truth, only labels. And if there's no truth, then what are we even talking about? Yet, if there is a truth, some invisible line between heap and non-heap, then where is it? Show it to me. You can't. Because the problem is not in the sand. It's in the concept. Our minds crave clarity, edges, definitions. But reality offers only transitions. The collapse of categories. The Sorites Paradox reminds us. Language is blunt. Reality is subtle. We say rich and poor. But how many dollars makes the difference? We say alive and dead. But what about coma or brain death? We say child and adult. But no birthday ever changed your soul. There is no switch, no buzzer, no moment, only a slope and the illusion of a line. Living in the gray. We try to define things so we can control them. But the Sorites Paradox whispers, your definitions are made of air. Things change slowly, quietly, grain by grain. And one day, you look in the mirror and ask, when did I become this? Not yesterday, not today, somewhere in the in-between. So tonight, as you lie still, grain by grain letting go of the day, ask yourself, how many thoughts make a dream? How many moments make a memory? How many changes make a new self? And if you don't know where the heap begins, maybe the heap was never real at all. The Doppelgänger Paradox. Imagine this. You're walking home. It's late. The streets are empty. You pass a shop window and glance at the glass and see yourself, but not just your reflection. Someone is standing behind it, wearing your clothes, matching your movements, looking back at you. It's you, perfectly, utterly, absolutely, your doppelganger. And in that instant, something deep inside you breaks. Because now the question is not, who are you? But, which one is you? The thought experiment. The Doppelgänger Paradox asks, if there were a being exactly like you, same memories, habits, scars, voice, thoughts, what would make you, you? You share the same past. You make the same jokes. You finish the same sentences. You remember your grandmother's perfume. You regret the same mistake from age 14. Everything matches. So who is the real one? And if there's no difference, does it even matter? Or does it matter more than anything? The fear of being replaced. This paradox taps into something ancient. The fear of being replaced. Not killed, not forgotten. Replaced. Silently. Perfectly. Without anyone noticing. They wave to your friends. They sleep in your bed. They scroll through your memories. And no one suspects a thing. Except you, watching from the other side. What is identity? Are you your body? Then so are they. Are you your mind? Then so are they. If you vanish, and the double continues your life, will the world have lost anything? Would your parents mourn? Would your partner know? Would you even know if the roles were reversed? And if a perfect copy of you could live your life without interruption, was your uniqueness ever real? Splitting the self. There are myths of this. The shadow twin, the mirror self, the uncanny double. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden part of you that walks beside you in silence. In science fiction, clones confront their originals. One must die, or both lose their minds, because there can't be two you, not for long. Something must give. The horror of symmetry. What disturbs us isn't the double, it's the symmetry. If someone tries to be you, but fails, they're a fake, a mask, no threat. But if someone tries to be you and succeeds, what does that make you? Disposable? Expendable? Or worse? Unnecessary. The test now asks, if you met your double and they begged you to believe that they were the original, how would you prove that you are? What could you say that they couldn't say? What thought could you think that they couldn't also think? What memory could you claim that they didn't also remember? You are no longer a person. You are a duplicate arguing with itself. So tonight, as your breath slows and you slip quietly out of the world, ask yourself, if someone else woke up tomorrow, in your bed, in your mind, in your skin, how would you know it wasn't you? And if you couldn't tell, would they? The silence of the infinite cosmos, listening for a voice that never speaks. You're lying still, the air is quiet, your thoughts slow. Above you, the sky continues, black, endless, eternal. And beyond that sky, more silence. A silence so vast, so deep, it might not end. Tonight, we drift into that silence, not to fear it, but to understand it. Let's talk about the infinite cosmos and the silence that surrounds everything we are. A universe without reply. We've sent signals into space. We've listened for echoes. We've built telescopes that stare across billions of light years. We've waited and waited. And what we've heard, mostly, is silence. No answers, no messages, no whisper of intelligence. Only the hum of stars, the flicker of galaxies, and the cold breath of dark matter. The Fermi Paradox. The universe is ancient. It is vast. There are billions of stars with billions of planets. So where is everyone? This is the Fermi paradox, the question that haunts every late-night thinker. With so many chances, why is the universe so quiet? Is it because we are first or last, or just ignored? Or is silence the only possible sound in a universe this large? Silence as a message. Perhaps silence is the message. Not absence, but restraint. Not emptiness, but calm. Perhaps we're not being answered because the cosmos doesn't speak in words. It speaks in light, in entropy, in rhythm. It speaks through the movement of comets, the dance of gravity, the birth and death of stars. And maybe we're just not fluent yet. Are we alone? It's the question we whisper when we look up. Not just, is there life? But, is someone else thinking? Is someone else watching? But the cosmos replies, in windless void and cosmic background radiation, in light so old it began before Earth had oceans. And we feel small, not erased, just quieted. The infinite is indifferent. The stars do not judge. The nebulae do not sing. The void does not mourn. The infinite cosmos does not care what you believe, what you build, what you fear. And yet, you care. You wonder. You reach. Is that not something? To be a flame that flickers in a windless universe. To burn even when no one sees. The human need for echo. We write stories, send probes, build radio arrays, search spectrums, cry out across the centuries. We don't want to be answered. We want to be known, to not vanish into the silence. But the universe teaches a strange truth. Even unacknowledged, you are real. Even alone, you are here. Even in the silence, you exist. Sleep and the great darkness. As you drift off, you may feel it, that faint hum of nothing. No noise, no task, no reply. But sleep, too, is a kind of silence, a return to inner space. And in that darkness, you don't disappear. You reorganize. You dream. Even when no one watches, the dreaming continues. Final reflection. The silence of the cosmos is not a punishment. It is the natural state of a universe without expectation. We add the questions. We add the longing. We ask the sky to speak, and it remains sky. But still, we look, and that act, the looking, is beautiful. You are not erased by silence. You are shaped by it. Sleep well. The universe is quiet tonight. But so are you, and that is enough. The binding problem. How do you become one? You open your eyes. A world appears. You see colors, shapes, motion. You hear a sound, footsteps behind you, a voice calling your name. You feel your heartbeat, the air on your skin, the gravity in your legs. And somehow this chaos, this flood of signals, arrives as one coherent experience. But how? That's the binding problem. Many parts, one mind. Your brain doesn't receive reality as a whole. It receives fragments, billions of them. The color of a rose is processed in one region, its shape in another, its scent, texture, and emotional associations elsewhere. Different circuits, different speeds, different languages. Yet somehow, when you see the rose, you see one thing. Not a list of properties, not separate data points, but a single red rose glowing in your awareness. Where does that unity come from? How does the brain bind the parts into a whole? The illusion of coherence, you feel whole, stable, singular. But your brain is not. It is modular, distributed, decentralized. There is no single control room, no central you pulling the levers. And yet, a you appears, a conscious subject. Is that an illusion? A useful fiction? Is the self just a temporary alliance of competing processes? A fragile treaty between memory, language, vision, and habit? Attention and synchrony? Some scientists think the answer lies in attention, that when you focus, your brain synchronizes certain areas, and that synchrony creates a sense of unity. Others point to neural oscillations, waves of electrical activity linking distant regions. But the mystery remains. What links this is red with this is round and this is mine? What merges color, shape, smell, and meaning into one seamless now? Even more strangely, why is some of it conscious and the rest just noise? The binding problem in you right now? Your eyes receive data from two slightly different angles. Your brain merges them into one image. You don't see two pictures. You see depth. Your ears receive timing delays. Your brain merges them into direction. Your memories are scattered across regions, yet you recall your own life as if it were continuous. This coherence is not given. It is constructed, every second, quietly, flawlessly, until it fails. When binding breaks, people with brain injuries sometimes lose the ability to bind features. They can see motion, but not shape. They can hear tone, but not speech. They can recognize parts, but not wholes. One patient sees the world as a shattered mosaic, each fragment floating, never clicking together. And it makes you wonder, is your sense of wholeness a convenience, a trick so effective you forgot it was a trick? Beyond the brain. Some philosophers think binding cannot be explained within the brain alone. They say unity is not physical, that consciousness must be something more, an irreducible field, a property of awareness itself. Others disagree. They say coherence is an emergent effect, like a symphony rising from separate instruments. But the mystery stands. You are made of parts, billions of neurons, thousands of systems. But somehow, you wake up as one. So tonight, as the pieces of your day begin to soften and dissolve, and your mind turns inward, ask yourself, how did all of this become you? The sounds, the thoughts, the breath, what holds it together? And when you sleep and the pieces scatter, where do you go? The simulation hypothesis. What if everything around you, the walls, the trees, the sky, your own hands, was not real? Not metaphorically, not psychologically, but literally. What if you were living in a simulation? The idea may sound like science fiction or the plot of a movie. But the question is older than computers. In many ways, it's the modern form of a very old doubt. How do we know the world is real? Descartes asked if a demon could be deceiving us. Plato imagined a cave full of shadows mistaken for truth. Buddhism speaks of Maya, the illusion of appearances. But in 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom gave the question a modern twist. He proposed what is now called the simulation argument. The core idea. Bostrom's argument is simple and disturbing. He said, at least one of the following must be true. Civilizations like ours never reach a point where they can simulate conscious beings. Civilizations that do reach that point lose interest in running simulations. We are almost certainly living in a simulation. That's it. Only one of those can be false. And if the first two are wrong, if it is possible to simulate consciousness, and if future civilizations do run simulations, then the number of simulated minds would vastly outnumber real ones. And statistically, we are far more likely to be one of the simulations, not the original. In other words, if simulated beings can exist, and if someone, somewhere, is running those simulations, we are probably in one. What would that mean? Imagine you are in a dream, but you don't know it. everything feels solid. The world follows laws of motion, logic, time. But all of it is running on something, some system, some code. In a simulation, matter is not fundamental. Bits are. You are not made of atoms. You are made of data. Your thoughts are patterns in a vast computational system. And nothing around you exists when you're not looking at it. Because rendering reality takes processing power. And if that's true, who made it? A civilization? An artificial intelligence? A bored teenager in another dimension? And more importantly, do they care? Does it change anything? Here's the most unsettling part. Even if you are in a simulation, you may never be able to prove it. The system could be built to hide itself, like code that deletes traces of its own execution. Even stranger, the simulation could be paused, rewound, or edited without your awareness. Every memory you have could be implanted. Your entire life could be a loop. But here's the deeper question. Would it matter? If your experiences feel real, if your joy and pain, your love and fear, your thoughts and choices all feel true to you, then does it matter whether they're made of carbon or code? Does reality depend on what things are made of, or on how they are experienced? You might reject the idea. You might say, there's no evidence. And you'd be right. But Bostrom's point is that you don't need evidence, only probability. And that, perhaps, is more disturbing. Because the simulation hypothesis isn't just about virtual worlds. It's about how little we know about what we take for granted. What is a mind? What is time? What is real? So tonight, as your body drifts into sleep and your senses dissolve into dreams, ask yourself, if everything you know is part of a program, does that make it meaningless? Or does that mean someone, somewhere, coded it on purpose? Philosophical zombies. You walk into a room. Someone is sitting there, reading. They nod at you, smile, sip coffee. You say hello. They say hello back. Their voice is calm. Their face reacts. They seem alive. But what if they aren't? What if behind that nod, that voice, that smile, there is nothing? No thoughts, no inner light, no experience, just behavior, just motion, just simulation. This is the idea of the philosophical zombie, a being that behaves exactly like a conscious human, but has no inner experience. It was proposed by philosopher David Chalmers in the 1990s as a way to explore the so-called hard problem of consciousness. What is it like to be? There are easy problems in neuroscience. How do eyes process light? What areas of the brain handle language or motion? These can be answered with experiments, with scans, with mechanisms. But the hard problem is different. It asks, why is there anything it is like to be you? Why does perception have a texture? Why does pain hurt? Why does color feel warm or cold? Why do we experience joy as joy and not just act like we do? This is where the zombie walks in. Imagine a being that is molecule for molecule identical to you. Same brain, same body, same memory, reaction time, vocabulary, habits. But inside, it is dark. No one is home. It doesn't feel. It doesn't know it exists. It processes, but it does not experience. You can't tell the difference. It cries when you tell it sad news. It laughs at jokes. It hesitates before confessing guilt. But it is a mask, a very good one. And if this is possible, Chalmers says, then consciousness is not reducible to physical function. There is something extra, something immaterial, something no scanner can see. And that disturbs people. because it suggests that consciousness might not just be a byproduct of the brain. It might be something deeper, something not yet understood, or not meant to be understood. Why it matters. Some philosophers reject the zombie idea. They say, if it walks like a mind, talks like a mind, and thinks like a mind, it is a mind. But Chalmers counters, you're just assuming that consciousness follows from behavior. But what if behavior is an empty shell? You can program a machine to scream when damaged. But does it feel pain, or only imitate the reaction? This leads to a terrifying uncertainty. What if you are surrounded by zombies, beings who speak and smile and weep, but are hollow inside? And worse, how would you ever know? What if the person you love has no inner world? What if your parents, your friends, your partner are just performing? What if you are? The flip side, now reverse it. What if you couldn't move or speak, but still had thoughts? What if your mind was full of memory and fear and wonder, but your body gave no sign? Would people think you're conscious, or would they treat you as a machine? Where does consciousness begin? In action, or in awareness? So tonight, as the outside world fades and your body begins to sleep, ask yourself, if someone acted exactly like you, but felt nothing, would they still be you? And if everything you've ever said, felt, remembered, could be mimicked by code or a lifeless twin, then what, in the quiet of your skull, proves you're real?